take.
Yeah, no, but I'm aware of what he's been saying in this regard. And,
yeah.
And
I think this is where maybe you guys got a little lost in that first conversation that you had.
I mean, so just as a general matter, I love much of what he says. He does, with some regularity, say something ridiculous enough with the same confidence he says all of the good things that I perceive a real problem with what he's doing.
Can you give me an example of one of those just for...
Well, I mean, did you see his event with Matt Dillahunty? Did you see that?
I didn't see it, but I know a lot of people have been talking about it.
Yeah, that's worth watching. But and again, I'm hoping, my hope is that we can make progress in these conversations where we don't get stuck just having a knockdown, drag out over things like the points I'm going to raise now. Because,
but by the way, real quick, for the record, just I'm more than happy to tell you, like, he, I think, is in that same exact spot. He wants it to be fruitful and friendly and all of those things, which I think goes back to what we talked about, an hour ago, about just the way we all relate to each other.
Right. But I mean, he'll confidently say things like, atheists aren't really atheists. I mean, like there's a real atheist is a psychopath who murders people. I mean, so those people have existed, but someone like Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins, or I mean, he said this directly to Matt Dillahunty in this case, they're not, they only think they're atheists, not really atheists. They have a God and that's functioning in their life, and they're just not acknowledging it, right? And again, it comes back to this historical claim that we all grew up in the West. We all just got our ethics and our theology without ever naming it. We got it in the water, right? And so any sense you have of what is good and worth doing, any sense you have of value, just the reason why it would be bad to murder somebody, the reason why you don't have to think that through from first principles every day, and you can just navigate this social space with other people in the West, it's because you are just fundamentally dependent on these stories, this tradition, right, and this God. And he's very, I don't know what the Steelman interpretation of what he's actually doing is here, but to my eye, he's very either evasive or non-committal about what he means by God. But he's however he's using the word, he's not making a clear claim about what he believes. He'll often say, it would take me, 40 hours to answer that, or I wrote a 600-page book on that, and I can't. It's like he will decline to answer a fairly straightforward question about what he believes about Jesus or about God. Or
right. So maybe you guys will get somewhere on that. He doesn't. I don't think. I think I could probably count on one hand how many times he's actually mentioned God specifically in the course of all this, because the stories and what he would say, or the maps of meaning, I think are much more important to him than to agree on the exact definition of God.
Yeah, but the claim, for instance, that I am in a way that I fundamentally don't understand, but he does, that I am captive of the Judeo-Christian tradition, right? That my ethics is born of it, and that my notion of ultimate value is somehow anchored to Jesus, right? I mean, that is just so preposterous as to be unarguable, right?
Shapiro would take a similar argument, just not related to Jesus, though. I think he would say something similar,
well,
right?
Because my mother was Jewish, presumably he would think I'm, Jewish rather than Judeo-Christian, right?
Right. Or that he would say that your Enlightenment values. I mean, I think when I've done this with him, he would say, if I say, well, all the goodness in me, the things that I believe in, the moral principles that I believe in are really Enlightenment values, he would say, well, you really have to dial it back to where
it's not proving the point he thinks he's proving with it, right? So it's, but these are like points of confusion that I think we could get past in 5 minutes, but it's also possible that he's going to dig in for 2 hours on this, and then we'll have 3 more events to do, and I'm not sure what the hell's going to happen. So, but I mean, I really hope to make progress with him, because again, I think what he's doing is very interesting on other fronts, and what he's exposed is a real need, a real hunger for a meaning-based conversation about how do you get your life straight in in the 21st century, and I mean clearly there's a hunger for wisdom that the secular community has not been answering in any kind of reliable way. And so when I hear from people who are saying, well, I've been an atheist, but what I'm hearing from Peterson is really causing me to get my life together, that just tells me that, I mean, it's no surprise. I've said this about atheism ever since I was talking about atheism. Yeah. Atheism is not a philosophy. Atheism is nothing. Mm-hmm. Atheism is just a denial of the false certainties of religious people. Mm-hmm. It's like, no, there's no good reason to believe in Poseidon, and there's no good reason to believe in Yahweh. That's atheism, right? So atheism doesn't give you anything that makes you live a meaningful life. And that's not, but the thing is, contra Peterson, that's not a knock on atheism. That's all the atheism. Atheism is just not being convinced by the bad evidence and arguments put forward by religious people. Mm-hmm. It leaves just a space for better conversations that you may or may not have, you may or may not discover, you may or may not fall in love with science and a rational approach to the contemplative life. I mean,
so in a weird way, as someone that wants to connect atheism to spirituality, the failure of whatever the atheist movement before you was, in a weird way, is kind of good, because you want to lead atheism to a future, right? Like,
well, I'm completely unconcerned by atheism. I'm concerned about the future, right? But it's like, you know, but again, the place where Peterson and I will have disagreed and will disagree is, I mean, I don't think he understands atheism, or I've never heard him say anything that is an accurate portrayal of what it's like to be, you know, this sort of atheist, or, mm-hmm. or you know, and certainly many atheists I know. Sort of reframing your experience. Yes, but the truth is, you can do that with stories that you know to be bullshit. Like you can do that with Batman.
Well, I'm telling you. I mean, I know Star Wars isn't a true story, but it has.
No, but I mean, but you could decide, like, I'm gonna get up each morning and think of myself as Luke Skywalker. Like, you know, you're not Luke Skywalker. Well, you know, Luke Skywalker was invented by someone who in your lifetime. Right, so there's no some deep thing going back to our DNA, right? It's just Luke Skywalker, mm-hmm. and you can do it. And perhaps, you know, perhaps Jordan would want to say, well, no, Luke Skywalker does go back to the DNA, because Joseph Campbell was really in touch with these ancient myths, and it was Joseph Campbell who gave George Lucas all of his, you know, story structure. Okay, leave it aside. You could do it with You pick the most preposterous character you want that could still conceivably be inspiring. You know, mm-hmm. Spider-Man, right? You could get up tomorrow and say, I'm just going to view each situation of the day that I encounter through the lens of, what would Spider-Man do? You know, how would Spider-Man act here? I'm walking into a Starbucks, right? I feel sort of vaguely neurotic, right? I'm about to meet the barista, and I'm like, you know, having trouble making eye contact, right? I'm the same neurotic person I was yesterday. But how would Spider-Man do this, right? Like, and how would you know, if I knew that I could just take down everyone in this place if I wanted to, and I could shoot a web and fly over a building, right? If I knew that about myself, how would I navigate each subsequent moment here? The truth of the matter is, that changes your psychology. You can do it with total fictitious bullshit, right? It's a trick. It's a mind hack, right? That's the same game, right? It doesn't require, and it doesn't require Jung to be right about the collective unconscious. Now, you could say, well, it only works if there really is something at the, you know, the substrate layer that is ancient and spooky. I mean, that's an empirical claim that, you know, may be unfalsifiable or may be worth debating. But the reality is that stories have power, even if and some stories have more power than others, right? And we can talk about, you know, what makes a certain story more compelling, or structured in a way that's more compelling. But the reality is that the mind is plastic to a remarkable degree, and our persistence in having the same mediocre experience we had yesterday is a kind of habit, mm-hmm. and you can create other habits that are more inspiring and more useful. And yes, it is totally possible to use some traditional framework to do that, or some weird cultic framework. I mean, someone can invent a new, you know, a new operating system, and, you know, and call it Scientology, or call it whatever, and gather acolytes under that, in that context. And even and this is how weird our circumstance is. You can have a malicious fraud doing that, someone like L. Ron Hubbard, who's just clearly a con man, right? And people can derive genuine benefit from it. It's not like every Scientologist is wrong about the benefit they got from Scientology. It's clearly they're not, right? It wouldn't persist to the degree that it has if everyone's just having a bad time and seeing no benefit ever, right? It would be over in a day.
Well, they're sweating all that
That's right.
or whatever they're doing in the sauna. So, all right, so then I think maybe we can wrap it with that. Because I don't want to, I'm not here to litigate, obviously, on behalf of Jordan. I thought if you could just get some of these ideas.
I'm sure we'll get into it.
So. What's the date of the first one?
People would have to check my website.
Is it July, or is it this month?
No, it's the end of this month in Vancouver. We've got 2 shows. It's like the 23rd and 4th, I think.
Yeah.
And then we've got Dublin and London in July, in the middle of July. The 14th, I think, is Dublin, and the 16th is London. Could be a day off there.
Well, I have him back in here on the 29th, so that'll be right in between the two. So maybe that'll be an interesting spot to kind of refresh some of this stuff.
Yeah.
All right. So then my final thing on this, and then we can wrap, would be: so what does it matter at the end of the day? Let's say everything you've said here is true, and a certain amount of people watching this can start going down that road and finding truth that allows them to live as presently and honestly and fulfillingly as possible. And let's say, for the amount of people that are showing up to Jordan's events, they hear what he's saying and feel that it allows them to do that exact same thing. Whether you believe that that's skimming off the top or not fully actualizing themselves, but they ultimately live a good life that is, that the life that's coming from what you're prescribing to what Jordan's prescribing, ultimately both become comparably moral, decent, good lives. At the end of the day, then, does it matter?
Well, I think having a coherent idea about truth matters. And so this is a sticking point that Jordan and I hit in our first podcast. Yeah. And I see it operating in a lot of what he's saying. And so that I think should be ironed out. And I think it can be ironed out, and you can still be totally enamored of the usefulness of myth. Right? Like you can still, like almost nothing else shifts in what he's doing, and you can still acknowledge that there's a difference between, this is what Brett Weinstein, I think, usefully dubbed metaphorical truth and literal truth. And it's only by the light of literal truth that you can even make that distinction, right? Like clearly we need those two categories. And we need to be able to say that certain things are not literally true, but they're useful, right? And certain things are just starkly false. I mean, they have no truth to them. I mean, someone could just be fundamentally mistaken about reality, and that could be, there's certain circumstances under which that could be useful, right? So it's like to make those distinctions is the only way to preserve a notion of truth that gets you something like a legitimate science and a legitimate error-correcting mechanism where it really matters that your beliefs both be internally consistent, your belief system be internally consistent, and map onto reality in some way that is, if they were false, you would be unlikely to believe what you believe. I mean, the problem is what people are getting, and this is traditionally what religion has been and what dogmatism always gives you. I mean, dogmatism is the state of no longer interacting with reality in a way that would error correct your beliefs. Like, I'm going to believe this thing that I believed yesterday, no matter what you tell me, no matter what you show me, no matter what happens in human history. Jesus is the Son of God, right? Whatever it is, right? That's religion, traditionally speaking, and that is precisely the state in which the human mind and human communities can't error correct and make intellectual progress. So clearly, that part is not worth preserving. And to some degree, I perceive Jordan as trying to have it both ways, and he'll endorse science in various ways, but he will also endorse. I mean, he won't call it dogmatism, but I'm perceiving it to be dogmatism, and so that's something that I certainly hope that we can flesh out and converge on. So
it's good that you guys are doing 4 of these, because I think each one is going to sort of be like a discovery session until until you can get enough of an agreement on that sort of base level stuff. And yeah, you may end up just lost in the weeds on it.
Well, unlike my podcast, we have a moderator really in all 4 times.
Douglas, Douglas is doing some of them.
Brett Weinstein's is actually a moderator for Vancouver, so he knows his job, and I think he'll be great at it. Douglas Murray is joining us in London and Dublin, and he's not a moderator, but I think just having Douglas there will keep us from missing each other totally. I mean, Douglas is so smart.
Having a British accent alone is a very calming effect on all this.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I don't think we should go 2 years again before we do this again.
Well, we should also say we have a conference coming up in New York in November, which you are emceeing.
Yeah.
And this is
very cool. This is sort of an idea you've been bouncing around for a while.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell everybody?
Because this is rather than avoid controversial topics for this conference, we decided to just ram toward the most provocative. And so we have a session on Me Too. I think it's titled "Has Me Too Gone Too Far?" And it's going to be a panel of all women journalists. I think that's true to say. And fantastic people like Masha Gessen and Barry Weiss and Katie Royfey. Rebecca Traister, I don't think can make it, but we're still building it out. But it will be the full spectrum of yes, it's gone too far to it hasn't gone far enough, right? So it should be a very interesting conversation. There's a panel on race with Glenn Lowry, who you know is fantastic, and I'm pretty sure Ta-Nehisi Coates is going to do it, and so Ta-Nehisi is just as far to the the extreme racialist side of this as possible. So,
you just wanted to thrust me in the middle of this thing and have at it, and see what happens.
And we'll have to talk about how that stuff gets moderated. But and then it's got Coleman Hughes, this young, crazy, he's
all-star
undergraduate who's writing these pieces in Quillette. To give you a sense of just how weird the left is, so Coleman Hughes has written these pieces on race in Quillette. He's this African-American undergraduate at Columbia writing these essays that so many of us have found just one, incredibly well written, right? I mean, he does not have any of the affectations of someone who's overwriting at his age, which is just amazingly rare.
And clean,
and just so clear-headed, right? And so I retweeted one of his essays saying, like, congratulations, Coleman, and I just decided to check my @mentions just to take the temperature of the situation, and this is more evidence of my racism that I'm favorably retweeting. It's like this Uncle Tom, as you'd expect. So it's amazing, but. Anyway, that again will be a panel that spans the full range of opinion on this topic of race. The question is, can we get beyond race? And then there's a panel on Islam that will have Majid and Ayan, who are all stars on the I would argue the perfectly sane side of this conversation. But it will also have Fareed Zakaria and Shadi Hamid, who